sermon will be brief, and just want to let you know that at the end of the sermon, when we give the invitation and have the invitation song, just go ahead and be seated after that song, and the elders will come up here to the front and we'll continue with that congregational meeting. Also, just let you know that we'll try to keep things as brief as we possibly can. If there's more questions or concerns, we can certainly accommodate that, perhaps by having another congregational meeting or maybe meeting with the elders privately. But we do want to give everyone an opportunity to participate, but we don't want this to, go on for hours and hours. So as I said, if need be, we can, I think, easily accommodate that by having an additional congregational meeting or private meetings with the elders, whatever you might prefer. So what we're going to be talking about here in this brief little sermonette is, as you can see popping up on the screen, the question, where did God come from? At first, this may seem to be a real problem, maybe when you've talked to your friends who are maybe a little bit skeptical about the biblical account of creation. And I don't know, maybe the batteries are running out on this thing, but it seemed like I pressed this button 4 or 5 times to get it to come on. So hopefully it's on now. I can hear it. But maybe in your discussion with your friends who are a little bit skeptical of the biblical account of creation, this may have been a question that they would ask you. Well, if God made the world, who made God? Right? Have you ever been asked that question? And some people seem to think that question is really a very profound question. Really, it isn't. One of the things that we're going to take a look at here as we look at this question of where did God come from, as I say, skeptics often ask this question, and as I say, it seems as though they often think they're saying something kind of profound when they ask that question, but they really aren't. The problem really is, and this is really the point of this little sermonette here, is when and if you get asked that question by a skeptic, this is what you need to ask them back. Well, where did anything come from? Okay, because that's the problem. It's not just a question that we as Bible believers have to be able to answer. It's a question that they as skeptics have to be able to answer as well. And that's the problem. If this is an issue that is irresolvable, well, it's not just an issue for us as Bible believers, it's an issue for the skeptic as well. Skeptics typically believe the universe, that is us, began with the Big Bang. The problem is, well, where did the pre-Big Bang stuff come from? See, this is where you're just taking the question and you're asking it back to them. Well, where did anything come from? If you think that we are the result of some cataclysmic Big Bang that happened 14.3 billion years ago, well, where did this stuff that caused the Big Bang to bang, where did it come from? What made it? And so that's the point. Where did anything come from? So everybody, whether you believe in God or not, do you see my point? You're faced with this same issue, if it's an issue at all. And I'm contending it's not. It is really the result of an irrational, incoherent question. Asking a question like, where did God come from, is asking a question like, can you have a 3-sided circle? Can you have a triangle with 4 sides? See, all you're doing is you're changing the definition of your terms in the middle of the sentence, in the middle of the question, and it becomes an incoherent question. The question itself is an illogical question. So everybody has to deal with this question. Where did anything and everything come from? If you don't at some point realize that, all attempts to explain origins begin with the same logical and reasonable assumption. And that assumption is that something always had to exist. All right. That's the only way you're going to have a reasonable discussion on this matter, is if you come to the conclusion that something has always existed. So for the most part, because of what we presently observe, some people will try to contend that the universe has always existed, but that doesn't fit what even the scientists who are skeptical about the biblical account of creation actually observe. Because what they actually observe is an expanding universe. Well, if the universe was expanding, you can reverse that, and what would happen at some point in the far distant past? The universe would be compressed down into a single factor, and that's really what they call a singularity. Also, the laws that govern the universe, the laws of thermodynamics, will not allow for the universe to be eternal. So we know, for instance, that the sun is going to run out of energy and it will cease to exist. And so that's just the way physics works. And so the law of entropy, the laws of motion, these all indicate that it just, the universe couldn't be the thing that has existed forever and ever and ever, because as we observe it now, it's running down, and energy is going from a usable state to an unusable state. So this Big Bang just simply posits the idea that whatever it was, this singularity, that whatever it was, that was the thing that's always existed. It has existed from eternity, okay? The second, and what I think is the much more reasonable position, is that it's God who has existed from all eternity. And so the issue simply becomes, which is the more reasonable, the more logical explanation to take into account for. And of course, we understand the Bible is making the case that it is God that has always existed. In Isaiah 57:15, for thus says the high and lofty one, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy, I dwell in the high and holy place with him who has a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. And so Isaiah points out he understands God as the one who inhabits eternity. And so that's the basic biblical explanation. It's God that has existed from eternity. And here in just a moment, we'll see why that is such a more logical, reasonable position to occupy, than to say that, that singularity, whatever the pre-Big Bang stuff, that pre-Big Bang matter was, it's not nearly as reasonable and logical to assume that that is what has existed from eternity than it is to accept the reality of God. For instance, in Romans 1, verse number 20, Paul there points out, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen. So that's the point. The evidence that we have around us, the evidence of the existence of the universe itself, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen. So that's the most logical and reasonable explanation. By looking at the universe around about us, we see that the most logical explanation is that it was a God, a grand designer, that brought it all into existence. And so it comes down to this factor. You really have two choices when it comes to trying to explain how we got here. Either you take the position that matter, the singularity, was the eternal thing. Matter, without the ability to think or feel, has no reasoning capability, no logic to it whatsoever. It's just matter. It's just like a rock. It can't think, it can't feel, it can't do anything. And that thing that existed from all eternity, that can't think or feel, accidentally created the universe. That's the position that you're going to have to occupy. Or is it more logical? Is it more reasonable to posit that a thinking, feeling, loving God purposely planned out and made this universe? And so those are really your two choices. And the issue becomes this. This is what we want to try to be explaining to people. Which of those two is the most reasonable? Which of the two is the most logical? Something always had to exist. Now, here's the point. This is Romans 1:20. The fact that we see an ordered universe. The universe is a cosmos. It is not a chaos. It is ordered. The fact that we see an orderly universe is evidence that the creator of the universe is likewise ordered. It can think, it can feel. Okay, the fact that we now see an ordered universe which functions in a systematic and orderly way, governed by the laws of physics, laws which the universe itself is subject to, they are unbreakable laws, demonstrates that the universe itself is a product of intelligent design. Now, again, the person you're talking to doesn't have to accept that, but here's the real point. Coming to that conclusion is reasonable. That is a reasonable and logical conclusion. That is not a silly, that is not a non-scientific, an unscientific position. In fact, I would contend it is the most reasonable conclusion that one can come to, given the evidence that is around you. Okay, and that's the point. Psalm 19:1, the biblical explanation. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork, is consistent with the evidence that we see, with what is observable in this present universe. Okay. And so it really comes down to this issue right here. If you're asked that question by a skeptic, well, where did God come from? You can respond by asking them, well, where did anything come from? All right. That's what they have to understand. And then you can point out that you believe the Bible is the most reasonable explanation. Why? Because the Bible takes the position that design demands a designer. It's what's technically known as the cosmological argument. Everything that has a beginning, technically it's called the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that has a beginning has to have a cause. And all the observable data that scientists now observe agree this universe had a beginning. You can't not have the laws of physics as we presently know them and have an eternal universe. You cannot have a universe that's observably expanding as it is right now and not go back in time and come to a point in time where that universe was completely collapsed upon itself and it did not exist. Okay, so all the observable data indicates that the universe is not eternal. The only thing, therefore, that is left is that eternal, for a skeptic, that is, the only thing that is left is that that eternal thing was cold, unthinking matter in some unknown form that cannot possibly exist according to the rules of this present universe. But that becomes what you believe in. You either take that cold, unthinking, unfeeling, pre-existent matter that spontaneously did something and brought all of this into existence, or you take the position that a loving, thinking, kind, compassionate creator made this. And those are your two positions. Which of those two is most reasonable? Which of those two is most logical? Based on that, we draw the lesson to a conclusion. And if you're not yet a Christian, I hope that you can see the validity of that argument, the reasonableness of that position. You can come forward here, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized, and be consistent with what is the most reasonable, logical conclusion that you can arrive at. You can submit your life to the will of God a loving and kind God whose power, magnificence, and beauty is displayed in the universe around you. You can do that this morning if you're subject. Come forward, make your wishes known as together we stand and sing.